They told you Rome fell to the barbarians. They told you the rot came from outside. They lied. The truth is, Rome was devoured from within, by something no army could kill. Imagine the marble heart of the greatest empire in history, still beating, still gleaming, but pumping poison through every vein. Behind the Senate's polished words and the legion's iron discipline, something ancient and profane began to whisper. Not in Latin. Not in Greek. In a language older than Rome, older than the seven hills themselves. A language of the gods men feared to name. And in 218 AD, that whisper did not just reach Rome, it seized the throne. He was 14 years old. Syrian by blood. A boy, but not entirely. His name, to the public, was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. A carefully chosen mask, forged in the fire of dynastic lies, linking him to the philosopher King Marcus Aurelius. But that name was a fiction, a shell. His true name, whispered only among those who knew the rituals, was Varius Avitus Bassianus. And from the moment he stepped into the light, it was clear, this was no ordinary air. His eyes had the kind of stillness you find in predators, not children. His presence shifted. Sometimes a prince. Sometimes a priestess. Sometimes a god. You didn't know whether to kneel or draw your sword. Rome had seen decadence before. Rome had seen cruelty before. But this was something else. Varius was high priest of a god the Romans didn't understand, Elagabal, the black stone that had fallen from the sky into Syria. A god without a face, without a body, worshipped in music, ecstasy, and flesh. The cult's rites blurred the boundaries between man and woman, master and slave, mortal and divine. And the boy priest carried those rites into the halls of empire. The soldiers saw him and felt something they couldn't name. The senators saw him and felt something they couldn't fight. And for the first time in centuries, the iron spine of Rome began to bend, not under the weight of armies, but under the gravity of a single will. I will tell you his story, but know this, once you see Rome through his eyes, you will never see power the same way again. To understand the boy who shattered Rome's traditions, you must first understand the empire's fractures, the cracks that festered unseen beneath centuries of conquest and control. Rome's greatest strength was always its discipline, its clear order, citizens and subjects, men and women, gods and mortals, all assigned their place. But by the early 3rd century, those boundaries began to crumble. In the East, ancient mysteries thrived, religions older and stranger than Rome's gods, where divinity wasn't distant but invasive, where men could become vessels for gods, and the lines of gender blurred like smoke. Among these was the cult of Elagabal, worshipping a black meteorite believed to be the very sun god incarnate. The boy's family, Syrian nobles hungry for power, knew this. They saw in the cult not just faith, but a weapon. His mother, Julia Soaemias, was no quiet noblewoman. She was a storm. Ambition burned in her eyes like a wildfire, a hunger for influence that matched empires. She molded her son as a living bridge between Roman imperial ambition and Syrian religious zeal. When political chaos erupted, after the assassination of Emperor Caracalla, the empire was vulnerable. Soldiers in distant provinces were restless, their loyalty to Rome wavering as their pockets emptied. Julia Soaemias seized this moment like a serpent strikes. Whispers spread like wildfire, the boy was Caracalla's secret heir, born in darkness, rightful emperor by blood. Whether true or not, it didn't matter. The soldiers needed a symbol, a god incarnate who promised restoration, power, and transcendence beyond mere politics. The army, Rome's backbone, bowed, not just to a boy, but to a living deity. This was not rebellion. This was transformation. A spiritual coup that would unravel centuries of Roman order. As he took the purple, Varius Avitus Bassianus shed the last vestiges of his humanity. He became Elagabalus, the god-emperor who would remake Rome not with legions, but with ecstasy, defiance, and taboo. It was a reign drenched in scandal, lavish banquets where norms shattered, where the sacred mingled with the profane, marriages to men and gods, rituals that twisted minds and bodies alike. Every act a challenge to Rome's old gods, its senate, and its very soul. But this power was fragile, built on illusion and fear, and it awakened enemies in every shadow. What happened next was not just history, it was a warning. Rome was never prepared for what came next. The boy emperor who claimed godhood did not rule like the Caesars before him. He tore down the facade of discipline and replaced it with something primal, a frenzy of excess, devotion, and defiance so profound it shattered centuries of Roman stoicism. Elagabalus was a storm, wild and unpredictable, crashing through marble halls with the force of a god possessed. He flaunted every rule, every law, every tradition. The Senate, those ancient gatekeepers of order, watched helplessly as their city transformed into a stage for his sacred theater of chaos. The boy wore the purple robes of the emperor, but he wore them like a costume, sometimes draped as a man, sometimes adorned as a woman, sometimes neither. His court became a carnival of the forbidden, where gender was fluid, and the boundaries between god and mortal, ruler and servant, sacred and obscene dissolved in a haze of incense and wine. Every public ceremony was a challenge, a ritual of rebellion. His religious rites were said to include acts Rome's moralists called unnatural. He married men, he spoke of divine unions with gods, he declared himself the earthly incarnation of the sun god Elagabal. The Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite protectors, were caught between loyalty and horror. Some whispered of abomination, others feared the growing cult around the boy would consume them all. The legions, already stretched thin and divided, were mesmerized and frightened, a potent mix that made resistance near impossible. The common people, too, were bewildered. To some, Elagabalus was madness made flesh, to others, a deliverer from a world suffocated by stale tradition and corruption. But beneath the spectacle was a deeper poison. Power had always been Rome's ultimate prize, but now power was untethered from reason. The boy's reign was a psychological siege, an assault on the very idea of order and identity. He weaponized desire, fear, and confusion. His throne was not just political, it was a temple built on chaos and control. And just as all empires bend under the weight of their contradictions, so too did Rome start to fracture, not with swords, but with whispered betrayals and silent conspiracies. This was a crucible where loyalty was bought and sold, where the line between devotion and destruction was razor-thin. The question was no longer if Rome would fall, but how long it could survive this intoxicating nightmare. Halfway through this descent, write Elagabalus reigns, twice in the comments below to seal your understanding, to bind yourself to this dangerous knowledge and awaken the power within. The Senate, the ancient heart of Roman authority, watched in stunned silence as their empire twisted into a grotesque reflection of itself. These men, heirs to 1,000 years of tradition, understood power as structure, ritual, and hierarchy. They spoke Latin, wore togas, and believed the gods favored order above all. But now, the very ground beneath their feet shifted like quicksand. Elagabalus was a blight on their world, an affront to Roman masculinity, reason, and the sacred laws that had kept the empire standing for centuries. Whispers filled the Senate chambers. Some demanded revolt, blood in the streets, and the restoration of Rome's honor. Others urged caution, fearful that challenging the boy god would ignite a civil war that would tear the empire apart. But what terrified them most was that the Praetorian Guard, their protectors, were no longer predictable. Loyalty splintered like shattered glass. The soldiers who had once sworn to defend Rome now kneeled before Elagabalus, his divine masquerade breaking down their discipline with intoxicating rituals and promises of transcendence. Behind the Senate's marble pillars, secret meetings plodded in hushed tones. Senators traded poison and promises, weaving conspiracies thick as the incense that hung heavy in the emperor's temples. Yet Elagabalus seemed always a step ahead, unpredictable, elusive, a boy whose power was fueled by fear and fanaticism as much as by religion and rebellion. Every attempt to unseat him was met with swift, brutal retribution. Enemies disappeared in the night. Allies turned to strangers. Rome became a labyrinth of shadows, where trust was currency none could afford. The old god seemed silent, or worse, complicit. The people whispered that the heavens themselves had turned their face away from the eternal city. As Rome's soul convulsed in this turmoil, the emperor's madness grew bolder. Public orgies, lavish banquets drenched in blood and wine, desecrations of temples, the boy who claimed divinity pushed limits no one dared cross. And yet, through this chaos, the empire did not collapse overnight. It clung on, suspended between devotion and destruction, order and anarchy, the known and the unknowable. This was more than politics. It was a psychological war, a test of wills between a crumbling order and a raw, chaotic power hungry to consume everything. The Senate's desperation would soon give way to violence. The question was who would strike first, and how much blood would be spilled before the empire found its next master. Chaos does not last forever, especially when it wears the face of a child god. Elagabalus's reign was a fever dream, intoxicating and horrific, but the fever broke. The empire, bleeding from within, was ready to reclaim itself, no matter the cost. The boy who dared to rewrite the rules, to dissolve boundaries between man and woman, god and mortal, was no longer untouchable. Behind the scenes, the wheels of vengeance turned swiftly. The Praetorian Guard, once beguiled by the boy's wild godhood, fractured under pressure. Old loyalties resurfaced. The Senate's conspiracies ripened into deadly plots. The final act was as brutal as it was swift. In 222 AD, barely 4 years after his coronation, Elagabalus was assassinated, stabbed by the very guard sworn to protect him. His mother, Julia Soaemias, was killed alongside him, their blood marking the end of the Severan madness. His corpse was dragged through the streets of Rome, a public spectacle meant to cleanse the city of his abomination. But the scars he left were deeper than flesh and bone. The empire shuddered under the weight of what had been unleashed, an empire where religion and power had fused into a dangerous, volatile mix. Where identity was weaponized, and the boundaries of human nature challenged and violated. Elagabalus had been more than a boy emperor, he was a symbol of Rome's unraveling, of a system so corrupt, so brittle, that it could be shattered by a single will drenched in madness and divinity. The old order struggled to rebuild, but the precedent was set. The gods of Rome were not immutable. The throne was not sacred. And the empire's spine, once ironclad, now trembled beneath the weight of its own contradictions. The story of Elagabalus is not just a cautionary tale, it is a mirror reflecting the darkness hidden inside every empire, every institution, every man who craves absolute power. Because when you peel back the layers, power is never clean. It is raw, messy, and dangerous. It seduces with promises of divinity, but delivers only madness and ruin. Now you know the secret Rome tried to bury beneath centuries of stone and silence. Are you ready to walk further into the shadows? Elagabalus's death was supposed to be an end. A cleansing fire to purge Rome's madness. But darkness rarely dies. It mutates, hides, and returns under new names, new faces, more subtle, more insidious. The boy emperor who blurred lines between gender, divinity, and power didn't just vanish from history. His legacy seeped into the bedrock of control itself, a blueprint for psychological domination disguised as divine right. Look around you. Power has changed its masks, but the game remains the same. The same forces that once bent Roman legions to obey priests will now shape ideologies, identities, and loyalties in ways so subtle, so woven into our lives, you don't even realize you're being led. They manipulate identity, fragment truth, weaponize desire, all to control the masses while promising liberation. Elagabalus was the first emperor to weaponize fluid identity as power. Today, that fluidity is both celebrated and feared, a battleground for control as old as empire itself. This is psychological warfare. The same cultic frenzy that made soldiers desert for a teenage god is now played out on media stages, political arenas, and social platforms. The battle is no longer fought with swords and spears, but with narratives, symbols, and emotions. Your mind is the new empire. Your identity the new battleground. Those who understand this are pulling strings behind every institution you trust, governments, corporations, religions, weaving illusions that keep you compliant and confused. The true power lies not in armies or wealth, but in controlling how you see yourself and the world. And once you see this, you cannot unsee it. You become aware. Awake. Dangerous. Elagabalus's story is a warning, the face of chaos when identity and power become indistinguishable. Remember the phrase now. Write it down. Elagabalus reigns. Elagabalus reigns. This is your key to unlocking the truth buried beneath millennia of lies. Look beyond the surface. History is a fractal, repeating itself in patterns so precise, they almost seem scripted. Elagabalus was not a one-off madness, but a symptom of a deeper, ancient sickness eating away at the world's most powerful institutions. Empires rise and fall, but the machinery of control endures, evolving, adapting, hiding in plain sight behind sacred texts, secret rituals, and gilded halls. The boy emperor's reign was a crucible where religion and politics fused into a weapon of mass manipulation. This fusion is the blueprint for every shadow empire since, where power is consolidated by controlling belief, identity, and desire. Think of it, the divine right of kings, the propaganda of regimes, the rituals of initiation in secret societies, all echoes of the same ancient strategy. Control the narrative, control the symbols, control the self, and you control the masses. Elagabalus's court was drenched in scandal because it dared to expose this mechanism nakedly, violently. It tore the mask off power's pretense and showed its raw, primal core. But the world recoiled, burying this truth beneath layers of denial, history rewritten to sanitize the madness. Yet the cycle repeats, every generation, every institution tempted by the siren song of absolute power, absolute control. You see it today in the way culture is engineered, identities are molded, and social systems are manipulated. This is not chaos. It is order, a dark order designed to keep you fragmented, distracted, and compliant. You are the battlefield. Your identity, your beliefs, your loyalties, they are the targets of this unseen war. To break free, you must recognize the pattern, feel its pulse beneath the surface of history, and reject the false narratives spun to enslave you. This knowledge is dangerous because it awakens a force that challenges every system built on lies and control. Are you ready to wield that force? Power doesn't just move armies or build empires, it moves minds. The real conquest is psychological. Elagabalus's reign was not merely political chaos, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare cloaked in religion and ecstasy. He weaponized what every ruler before and after would come to know: fear, desire, and identity itself. Imagine a world where the boundaries between man and woman, God and mortal, loyalty and rebellion dissolve like smoke. Confusion becomes control. When your identity is fragmented, your mind becomes a battlefield. Fear seeps in, fear of rejection, fear of exclusion, fear of losing the self you thought you knew. Desire is twisted, promised liberation but delivered bondage. The boy emperor's androgyny, his sacred rituals, his marriages beyond human understanding weren't just scandalous spectacles. They were tools designed to destabilize the mind, to fracture reality so that power could slip through the cracks. Today, these tactics have evolved, more subtle but no less powerful. The battleground has shifted to culture, media, and social identity, where control is exercised by shaping how you see yourself, what you believe you deserve, and whom you should fear or trust. This is psychological control, soft, pervasive, and nearly invisible. You are nudged, pushed, and pulled toward confusion. Divided from yourself, divided from truth, divided from others. This division is power's greatest weapon. Elagabalus showed us what happens when control becomes chaos, and chaos becomes control. Understanding this is your weapon, to reclaim your mind, your identity, your power. But be warned, this knowledge is dangerous. It can isolate you, unsettle you, and mark you as a threat to the invisible rulers. Yet without it, you remain a pawn in a game you never knew you were playing. History is written by the victors, but more dangerously, it is rewritten by those who fear the truth. Elagabalus's story was buried beneath centuries of silence, sanitized into myth, and dismissed as madness. But beneath the surface lies a torrent of suppressed truths about power, identity, and control that rulers feared would unravel their fragile empires. These truths have been erased, twisted, and weaponized against those who seek to uncover them. Every empire fears the chaos that comes when its carefully constructed illusions crumble. That is why stories like Elagabalus's are painted as mere scandals or deranged aberrations instead of profound warnings. The cycle repeats, each generation taught to fear those who challenge identity, who blur boundaries, who wield power outside the rules. But the real rebellion is to reclaim the lost knowledge, understand how power corrupts through control of identity and belief, and see through the manipulation woven into the fabric of society. You are not powerless. Every mind awakened to this truth is a threat to the invisible chains that bind us. Reclaiming this knowledge is a dangerous path, but it is the only way to break free from cycles of control and submission. Walk it deliberately. Question everything. Seek what lies beneath the surface, and do not be satisfied with the sanitized histories offered to you. The greatest power is in truth, raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic. And once you embrace it, you cannot go back. You become a force, a disruptor, a guardian of knowledge, a man who commands his own destiny rather than bowing to shadows. This is your awakening. You have walked this path with me, through shadows, madness, and forbidden truths. Now, the final truth: power is never given. It is taken. Elagabalus seized an empire not by right, but by rewriting reality itself, by bending identity, belief, and desire to his will. His reign ended in blood and betrayal, but his lesson remains: control the story, control the self, and you control everything. You stand now at the crossroads. Will you remain a pawn, shaped by forces that seek to fracture your mind and bind your spirit? Or will you become the master, awake, aware, and unbreakable? This knowledge is dangerous because it demands responsibility. To see through the illusions is to accept the war raging within and without. To forge your identity on your own terms. To build your empire, not of stone and blood, but of will and truth. The empires of men fall. But the empire within endures. Carry this knowledge like a weapon. Speak it in silence. Act with the power of one who has seen the hidden gears turning beneath the surface. You are no longer blind. The boy emperor who shook Rome with madness and divinity is your mirror, and your warning. Rise beyond the chaos he embodied. Forge your legacy in fire and shadow. Because now you know. And once you know, you can never go back.